Good morning, everyone. It's the, sixth day of Sesshin or something like that. Wow, we've been having a strong Sesshin, I think, right? Really strong and deep. And so keep going, just one more day. So today I wanted to dedicate my talk to my mother, Margaret Mitsuko Tahara Tanoue, because tomorrow's her birthday. She would have been 99 years old tomorrow, and she died 13 years ago in November. She was born on December 7th, 1925. And so on her 16th birthday, it was Pearl Harbor happened. She was living on the big island of Hawaii up in the about 1,500 feet elevation. A little cooler there, green coffee trees, a lot of coffee. And she was a very active, embodied person. She used to ride horses, which I just discovered later. She was a horse person, and her brothers were as well. And they would have horse races up there. And I don't know if she raced, but my uncles did. And she was like the third of nine children. And my grandfather, her father, a few months after Pearl Harbor happened, was taken by the FBI to a volcano. There's a Kilauea military camp there. And so a number of community leaders were taken, and priests and Buddhist priests, and interned as possible enemy aliens. And she never saw her father again because he died in camp about 9 months into camp on Oahu. There was a camp in the middle of the island called Honouliuli in a very dry area. There was a big gulch there, and that's where they had the camp for her father and a number of other people. But her brothers, older brothers, were into kendo. You know what kendo is, right? You're with the sword, and you're like, and like, so right? It's interesting, it's really great. You know, it's a martial arts, so it's a discipline. And later, one of the uncles, at least I know one of them, was in the Hawaii National Guard. And they enlisted, even though their father was in prison, they enlisted because they wanted to show they were loyal Americans. And I think that kendo training must have helped them because they were part of the 100th Battalion, 100th Infantry, I think it was, of the 100th Battalion, of the 442nd Battalion. 442nd was mostly Japanese Americans in that battalion, which was the most highly decorated in terms of Purple Hearts and whatever else, because they really gave it their all there. So her brothers were in the 100th that went to save the Texas Lost Battalion in the Vosges Mountains in France. I think it's in France, because they were surrounded by the Germans. And there were 275 Texas Battalion, people, soldiers. And I don't know, they said maybe about 800 of the Japanese Americans, maybe a little more actually, because there were 150 deaths and about 1,800 injuries in that whole incident or battle. Luckily, my two uncles, they were not hurt and made it. But I can't imagine the trauma that these soldiers went through. In fact, I was reading, there's a quote by a person who was there, Mitz Takahashi, who joined the 442nd soon after the Vosges campaign. And he recalled in observing intense trauma in the surviving soldiers. And here's what he said. My first impression when I joined the 442nd is the fellows that had gone through the Battle of the Lost Battalion and the Battle of Bruyères. They looked like insane people. It was frightening to look at them. They were so traumatized in so many ways that you knew that they had gone through an awful lot. They were stressed out. And my first impression was, my God, these guys are scary to look at. I can't imagine. We're really lucky here, really kind of privileged, really here. That intense trauma. So bringing it back here to this room where we are sitting in our seats, I just want to thank Myogetsu, Reverend Myogetsu, for a beautiful Dharma talk yesterday on the 8 worldly winds, the 8 worldly conditions that buffet us at any moment, and how important our practice of Zazen is in helping us to be spacious with it all, to have equanimity amidst it all. I'm just the comparison in terms of the stress that they went through. And my uncle, I know one of them, he was a military man. He was in the National Guard. He went twice to Vietnam after this. And I do have some stories about my cousins, right? Living with a very strict and rigid father. He was a military man. So I want to work on that, putting together that side of the family genealogy, because there's a wealth of stories there, I know. This is our ancestors, my ancestors. So let's just review those 8 wins again, because there's so much there to practice, right? Happiness versus suffering. Not getting attached to either too much. It's okay to enjoy it, but too much, too grasping, too tightly can cause suffering, more suffering. Fame versus insignificance. Fame versus insignificance. We got to work on that self that feels unworthy, right? Praise versus blame. Right, again, I think that comes from that self that's just not feeling good enough. So has to seek praise or blame to make sure it's looking good. And then gain versus loss. So the salad dressing incident, I'm just going to touch on it lightly here. The salad dressing incident, it just brought to mind for me growing up, whenever we were cleaning or whatever, my father would say, if we didn't do a good job, he would say, "Oh, so kapulu." That's Hawaiian for, what is the exact? Not cleaning something well. Kapulu. Do it again. Kapulu. And so I hated that word kapulu. I didn't want to be called kapulu, right? And I was kapulu on the salad dressing thing. I didn't really check it. And I was trying to blame on. So this practice, I mean, it really helps me to see what I'm doing, what I'm feeling, number one, and what I want to do if I don't do it. I'm doing it in my mind. So I want to say making mistakes is a good thing here. I know we generally don't like making mistakes because praise and blame, right? Praise and blame. But it's a good thing to make mistakes here because that's how we learn. That's how I know you're trying, So that's an important thing. And we have a thing about being perfect in this society, and we really have to take a look at what is that all about? Is it about praise and blame? Can we have equanimity and just hold? That's hard work, right? It's hard work. Bearing witness to those uncomfortable feelings that we would really much prefer to distract or, get rid of it by blaming somebody else. So it's all practice. It is all practice because those winds are relentless. I also wanted to talk about ritual. This whole Sesshin is a ritual container, right? It is. It's all wonderful practice about how mindful are we? How embodied are we? It's just good questions to ask and not necessarily expecting an answer right away. If it doesn't come, it's okay. Just keep asking the questions and stay open, right? Open. And then bearing witness, those two just go together. Bearing witness, especially, it's hard when it's uncomfortable. But just hang in there. Have courage. Everything changes. So I was reading this really great article by Anne Klein called Revisiting Ritual in Tricycle. She's a Tibetan teacher in Houston, I think, Dawn Mountain, and also teaches at Rice University. She put out the book, The Great Bliss Queen, one of, which is about Yeshe Tsogyal, which is the consort, who was the consort of Padmasambhava, the one who brought Buddhism from India to Tibet. So she says, she has this nice quote here, Zen practitioners, intent on taking care of the Buddha all around them, honor everything as worthy of keen attention. Right? We're working on attention here. Where is our attention? They express this through precise and formal ways of bowing, eating, washing, entering the meditation hall, sitting on cushions, rising, and moving through the day. Just paying attention to what you do. Just being right there versus having to get somewhere. And that's a very embodied practice. You're trying to drop into the body and just do what's right in front of you. And we're trying to do it together for the most part. So in hula, right, I remember when I was first starting, it's such a group activity, but you have to know your part. Otherwise, you're kind of out of sync with everybody. You know, you want to be in sync, right? And it's a beautiful thing when you're in sync. And it's a process of making mistakes and being a little rough, you know, but repetition is a key here. So bowing, okay, because we do a lot of bowing, and Suzuki Roshi had a really wonderful thing to say about bowing. And he said, by bowing, we are giving up ourselves. To give up ourselves means to give up our dualistic ideas. So there is no difference between our Zazen practice and bowing. So on the cushion, we're really working to give up the self. We're trying to let go, just be there on the cushion. Because the self can get us into a lot of suffering. So we're just trying to let it go so that we can see the wholeness instead of you and me, duality. So usually when you bow to someone, it's like paying respects. Yes, that is definitely one thing. It means that. But he says, but when you bow to Buddha, you should have no idea of Buddha. You should become one with Buddha. You are already Buddha himself. So you're not bowing to Buddha, you're bowing to enlightened nature. When you become one with Buddha, one with everything that exists, you find the true meaning of being. When you forget all your dualistic ideas, everything becomes your teacher, and everything can be the object of worship. Right? Dogen is saying that when you forget the self, then the 10,000 things you can awaken to them. So when you are just yourself, be yourself also, just yourself. He's saying you bow to yourself in its true sense, and you are one with everything. You have to drop the self. So bowing is a very serious practice. He says you should be prepared to bow even in your last moment. When you cannot do anything except bow, you should do it. This kind of conviction is necessary. Bow with this spirit, and all the precepts, all the teachings are yours, and you will possess everything within your big mind. Right, big mind, he talks about big mind, emptiness, big. So service is a truly embodied practice. Nyogetsu gave wonderful teachings on the Heart Sutra and on the identity of relative and absolute. So if you went to her classes, you have an idea of the largeness of those sutras and the smallness of the self, of the meanness, meanness, not meanness, although I guess that could be too. So you have a sense of what we're chanting, right? The sutras, but see, it is a choreography that we're all still learning. It's a choreography, right? So that's an embodied thing. And you have to have patience and just go slow, basically, you know. Try to review ahead of time what your position is helpful, okay? And then not to expect it happening all at once. So I just remember seeing Roshi, how he goes onto the ryoban, right? The ryoban are the cushions on the side. And I just asked him today, all right, so I've been watching you, but I'm not really sure what the procedure is. So there is a procedure. So when you go onto the middle of the cushion, you bow first gasho toward the altar, then you put your hands in shasui and bow to each other, return. That's how you get onto the cushion. It doesn't have to be all together, but when you go onto your cushion. So that's a little choreography there too. So we're just all learning this and then remembering the bows. What are the bows for, right? So chanting, we're chanting these beautiful sutras that have such depth to them. The words, the sound, the reverberations in our bodies are doing something. We're not totally sure what, but they're doing something in terms of this space and beyond. The beautiful Sino-Japanese way we've been chanting, I've been so happy we've been doing it the last couple of days. And I remember hearing that because I grew up in this small plantation town of Kukayao, a sugar plantation town, right? On the Hamakua coast, a lot of sugar cane planting. And whenever there was a funeral, we would go to the Shin Honganji temple, Puilo Honganji temple, for Japanese Americans, Japanese folks who were dying, because they were the Issei, the first generation, many of them couldn't become citizens. So we went to the temple, and there's a whole thing. There were people there, like my father would often, they would accept donations to help to pay for the funeral, right? Because they were not wealthy, So there'd be two people, they called it koden. They'd take an envelope, right, with some money in there. And then we go in, and I remember the altar around, the thing around the altar, where the altar was inside this little structure, was beautiful, ornate gold and wood carving. I don't even remember what the carvings were, but I remember being, just loving to just look at that. And then the altars, they would have cloth like that, which that cloth we got from Daifukuji, Soto Zen temple in Honalo, which is the west side of the big island. It was their 50th anniversary. And when I was there last, Jiko Sensei said, "Would you like this cloth? I thought you could use it." I was like, "Yes, I would love that." So I cut a piece to put it on this altar. It's their 50th anniversary. No, I think it was their 100th anniversary of the temple. Beautiful brocade from Japan. So at that Buddhist service, there would be, for the funeral, there would be 3 or 4 priests, Soto priests, or the Shingon priest. The Shingon priest in particular had this amazing voice. And they would be chanting the Heart Sutra in Japanese, Sino-Japanese, while everybody went to offer incense, just like we do here for memorial service. And I remember, and they would all take breaths at different times, so it would be this beautiful thing. And this particular Shiba Sensei had a great voice, sonorous, deep. I was like, wow, this is great. I remember thinking that when I was like 10 or whatever. Just beautiful. He also taught judo, so he was in good shape, good diaphragm, good sonorous voice. And interesting about him, the local people would go to him because he had, Shingon is kind of a mystical Vajrayana style of Japanese Buddhism. And people would go to him like, if they had lost something or if they were sick. And I just heard a story from my cousins who would stay with my paternal grandparents during the summer. They were like, I don't know, 7 or 8. They developed this like convulsions all of a sudden, and the doctors couldn't do anything about it. So grandfather took them to Shiba Sensei. Well, I think it was Shiba Sensei, I'm pretty sure it was. And what he did was he got a piece of wood and he hammered a nail in it. They went down to the cliffs and he threw it in the ocean. And their convulsions stopped. It's like, okay, so this is something beyond the intellect, right? It's whatever it is, I don't even know what to describe it as. But he was a very, very warm, big, and very generous man. My cousin was just telling us this story maybe a year ago, when we were getting together to do our genealogy of our father's side of the family, or the paternal side. So then there's also sounds we're listening to, right? The mokogyo. And the makugyo is interesting because if you hit it too hard, it hurts my eardrums. But if you hit it too soft, it's okay. But if you hit it a little louder, there's more energy in the service. So that's interesting. So the makugyo hitter, the makugyo person, has to have just the right hit, has to be in tune with the makugyo. You know what I mean? It's an art, really. It's the feel, because you're giving energy. It's the rhythm of the chant. The beat. Well, the beat and the rhythm, right? So that's interesting. And then the choreography is, for example, the hako and the jisha coming in together to put the hako box onto the little table there. So in the beginning, you're just doing it, but eventually with repetition, you go a little deeper and you can actually feel each other without looking, and you just go together and then you come back together. So that's what it is by going a little deeper into the body and body experience of the ritual. So Anne Klein was saying, ritual practice is more about what we do than what we think. Again, it's dropping into the body, what we do versus what we think. And it is a practice, because a lot of us are just, here in the head, right? So it's a practice. You have to be patient to get into the body. And when we feel in tune with ritual expression, Anne Klein says, its social cohesion and choreographed activity affirm our sense of belonging and being. In Buddhist and other spiritual communities, ritual expression provides support for very personal inner work. So noticing what's coming up, right, for you. Why? Inquiring, just being open to whatever is arising in your body and just bearing witness, really intently being present to what is arising. And then what happens if you do those two things really well? Some kind of compassionate action arises. Could be for you, could be for others. Some action will arise. Then there's smells, right? The incense, it's just creating this container, this sacred container we're all creating together. So, ritual practice engages the whole person. That's exciting. Maybe. Okay. They might open doors nothing else in your experience has opened. So this idea of wholeness is already, Klein says, in tension with the mind-body divide. that is a marker of modern cultural inheritance. Right? Already in tension. Well, in our culture, there is definitely an emphasis on the mind. Okay. So she says, from our modern vantage point, ritual gives us a chance to hone skills of wonder-filled inquiry. In wondering, we come alive, released from judgment, keen to know just what happens in our body, mind, and imagination as we bow, chant, or imagine sending out sound and light, like loving kindness. She continues, ritual's operative premise is that physical and imaginative gesture, including the movement of energy in and beyond the body, will reshape our lived experience. Will reshape our lived experience. This happens because body and consciousness are both impacted by such performance. They are both impacted because they are waves in the same ocean of experience. The body is not just the material container for mind, and mind is not just a witness to the body. Such wholeness is not altogether foreign to our experience, however modern we may be. Whoever we are, we discover moments when the divide between self and world, mind and body, as well as between ancient and modern voices within us, can soften. She says, what's worth noting is that living too much in our heads, as most moderns do, is impoverishing. Addressing this tendency is as necessary for ritual practice as it is for healing certain lacunae, blank spaces or missing parts in modern life. In both cases, it means going against the objectifying grain of modern culture to acknowledge waves of enrichment that start to flow as we deepen our capacity to be more present to lived experience. And to recognize our own subjectivity and our multiple styles of knowing, sensory, intuitive, and so forth, as resources for exploring inner and outer worlds. After all, consciousness is the one phenomenon that embraces the whole of our experience. Any all-embracing ritual is poised to make us aware of this lived wholeness, but only if we can sense what our experience is. I have all these underlined. I have to read it. It's so good. Okay, here's more. Our mind wanders incessantly, but our body and senses are always in the present. To investigate our embodied experience is to investigate the living present. Practitioners orient toward precise observation of how a specific ritual in a specific session challenges, changes, or otherwise impacts us. This, in my view, is one of the most important and modern learning curves for bringing meaning to ritual practice. If we are lucky, this process surfaces patterns that until now were invisible. Patterns brought to awareness run the full range of common habits of procrastination, lack of self-worth, anger, and rigidity. Seeing these is essential for getting to the next layer of ritual efficacy, where our cognitive and somatic inquiry is specifically informed by Buddhist perspectives. Those Buddhist perspectives see all patterns, as well as the nuanced sensations associated with them, as expressing our extremely subtle holding on to the kind of reified meanness that is for Buddhists at the crux of the great illusion that practice is meant to dissolve. Okay, so she's a Tibetan, right? So it's a little bit, I mean, it's great, it's all great. And also there's this, right, we sit because we're already enlightened. We don't sit to become enlightened. But Zazen is so important, I feel. And even to understand what meanness feels like takes patience, time, and attention. It takes time for ritual practice to become intimate. I love that she says that. It takes time. It requires sustained attention and patience, both of which go against the grain of contemporary life's breakneck pace and culture of wholesale distraction. Like how she puts her words, right? What's more, the repetition ritual entails may feel anathema to modern ideas of individual expression and creativity, but repetition is key to ritual's transformative power. Repetition is what allows something brand new to occur. Repetition, like the lapping of ripples against a rock, gently shifts the ground on which we tread, and so alters our relationship to the things we experience. It changes our relationship to experience itself. So in this way, ritual elements are a great source of support for us. All right, then, I think let's have some discussion about this. Some dancing, maybe.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. to speak more to your mention of the practice of bowing, what is it a good question to ask? What is the significance of the lifting of the Buddha when we prostrate? Just what or what
Right. So you're lifting the feet of the
the
Buddha.
Buddha? Yeah.
So it's just helping you, with the posture, right? I'm sure there's more deeper meaning to that because a lot of people do this, right?
Right.
And that's like, throwing the Buddha out.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
So it's like,
But lifting the feet, how come we would do that? Or what's the significance of lifting the feet in general? Just
well, that's how your palms are. So
okay.
it could be under the feet or, it's, what is it?
Humble.
Well, humility, of course, always.
Okay.
Pride, can get you in trouble.
But the motion is to put the Buddha above you. Is that the idea, or is it?
Yeah, I guess, yeah. Above your head. Your head is down on the ground.
Okay.
You're being with the earth, not up here.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, Roshi, what a beautiful talk. It really, I love your attention to ritual and, so many different forms that we have in our practice that's so easy to pick and choose. We like this, we don't like ritual. We like to sit, we don't like to chant. And I love your description of how it's the potential for transformation is everywhere if we pay attention. And what I was told one time is if you can drop your weapons of mass distraction,
That's great.
and which is always present. So thank you so much, and for sharing the beauty of your family history and just heart touching. Thank you.
The talk snuck up on me as it went along. It was amazing. But you said something right at the end that struck me about ritual, because I've always loved ritual and the timelessness of it. I had read that ritual is a recreation. So you're creating timelessness by redoing this over and over. But what you said that really struck me is doing the same ritual over and over, paradoxically, at least to me, creates something brand new. When you redo the same thing over and over and get out of your head with going, why am I doing it? I just did it. I did it yesterday. I'm going to do it tomorrow. Why am I doing it? It's an amazing transformation and timeless. So it was a beautiful way of expressing it. Thank you.
So I want to say something about your mother, because I knew June's family, and there's something about June's family. They were anybody could walk in their house. It didn't matter who they were; they would be accepted, no matter. They just wide open. Both her father and her mother would just take people in. But the thing about June's mother that's a lot like June is that she liked people. She really liked people. And we go down to the beach, she would wander off and just wander up to strangers and start talking, She was like, and she'd, hit it off with them. And she was like that wherever she went. She would just be open to strangers and people. The other thing that I want to say about the Japanese community in Hawaii that I grew to really appreciate. I didn't grow up there, but the Japanese community was poor. They were, they worked in the plantations. Most of them came to Hawaii from Japan, and they worked in the sugar plantations. They weren't wealthy. And as a community, they held together. They were pretty tight knit as a cultural community. And they pooled their resources and built these beautiful, beautiful Soto temples, Honganji temples, Shin Buddhist temples, all over the islands, they built these temples, and beautiful temples. And I was always just amazed that they did all this with, they, they came together. They used their communal resources together to build beautiful temples. Yeah. But June's parents were, and they know how to tell a good story. June's father, you can tell from listening to her, that June's father, he could, oh man, he could tell good stories.
Thank you, Roshi. Such a great talk with so much good stuff in there. I wanted to ask you about chanting. And when we chant, we don't use our normal voice. And at least like that's what it sounds like to me. And I've heard some other traditions, the chanting, like you described, the sound, the vibration, it's almost otherworldly. So I was curious if there's a specific technique for chanting? Like, are we focusing on a certain part of our body, our throat, our diaphragm? If you could speak about that.
Well, when we chant also, the way I've learned it here is the ino should be the loudest voice, actually, because the ino, it sets the pace and all of that. And from my hula training, you want to chant from your diaphragm, but you can use your regular voice too, absolutely. You shouldn't have to change your voice. Some people are gifted, they have a resonant sound chamber, whatever their build or whatever, or they work out so they're strong, and they have that strong, beautiful, sonorous voice. But the ino position, actually, we had an ino once, Jeff Strauss, who's a classically trained baritone opera singer. And it wasn't actually his using of the sonorous thing that really got me, but when he just did it once, when he named the death list, each name, it was like a caress or a real honoring in his voice. It was so deep and strong for me. So with repetition, right? So he had the training to want to see what the meaning was of this. It was the first time he did it, and that was the first and last time I've heard it that way. When I do it, I try to do it as well, just being intentional about each name versus just going down the list, because we have a long list, we have a long list, but the intention is interesting, what happens with that. So that's a new kind of way of, yeah.
Well, and this is fascinating for me. And one of the things that I've been noticing, particularly as we've moved to the Japanese and the full ancestor list, is I have felt, as I was doing it, a dropping off. That there's not a me saying the words. And at one point, I was literally watching myself as the names were being read. And I was like, oh, this is kind of cool.
So yeah, there's, Roshi says this, chanting with your ears also. So it's not just about you belting it out there, but you're also listening so that you're kind of becoming one with your own chanting with. And I want to also say that when we were just starting this, before we started our Zen Center of Hawaii, 2 Soto Zen priests would come from opposite ends of the island, the east side and the west side, to Waimea in the center where we lived. And they used to sit, just come like 6 to 7, they would sit. So that means they have to get up early. It's an hour drive from both to Waimea. They were in the Waimea Honganji, sitting on the pews and just sitting from 6, and whoever wanted to join could join. And so we went, they had been doing this for a while. And then something happened and they couldn't use the church anymore. So we talked about, and we said, well, they can come, you know, at our place, because we were just getting, we had an upstairs space that we were using first as an art studio, then as a computer thing, and then we started sitting in that space above the garage. And they would come, and whoever else wanted to come. And then we would do service after, and Kato sensei from the Hilo Taishoji Soto Temple, he had this amazing voice. I was like, I'm hearing it again, you know, this beautiful sutra that I love. And they helped to start our Zen Center of Hawaii, 1993, I think we started 94, 30 years ago. Grateful to them. I think Kato sensei, I think he might have done, I don't know what, but he must have done taiko or something, because they do taiko in those, right? So they're fit. I think that helps with having, you know, but I think not everybody has that voice, and it's okay, because if you are chanting from your heart, that's the other thing. You're really just chanting from your heart. That's different than just chanting the words also, right? So that's a whole nother kind of development with repetition.
Morning, Roshi. Good morning, Roshis and Reverend and Shuso and Hi Sangha. Roshi, I wanted to ask you for the longest time, you once sat on the floor with a drum instrument between your knees, and you were sitting and you played it and you sang, and it was just the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. And I wanted to ask you, number one, what was that? Number two, was that Hawaiian or was that a Buddhist instrument? And will you allow us to hear that again ever?
It was a double-headed gourd that I made, put together 2 gourds, and it is a Hawaiian implement that accompanies, it's the beat for the chant that I was doing. And in Hawaiian, chanting is definitely, you have to come from your heart. When you're first learning, of course, it's just the words, but repetition, then it comes from your heart, right? And the Hawaiian people are very heartfelt people. So yeah, I could do that sometime. Maybe during the circle on Saturday.
Thank you. The talk, lovely. I do love to hear about your family. Thank you for sharing. Once we were in Minnesota, and when we went together, you did such a beautiful chant of invitation before we walked through the forest. I don't know if you remember this.
Minnesota?
Was it Minnesota? Wisconsin, thank you.
Oh, Wisconsin.
Yeah, okay, let's orient ourselves to the map now. Okay, yeah. Wisconsin. Thinking just about talk, as we're talking about chanting, you did such a lovely chant of invitation to the forest, and I really feel like that, I love the way you chant. I love chanting with my ears to you, because that sense of oneness is so there when you do that, and I really appreciate when I have the opportunity to hear that. Thank you.
Again, thank you. It's beautiful. There's other ways to meditate, and I know when I was looking for a home for a practice 20 years ago, amazing. And the ritual is really what sealed, my decision to be part of this practice. It's just so rich. Another thing is when we chant the long list of our ancestors, it's just so beautiful. And today, somewhere around the middle, I think it was when we were chanting the women, and all of a sudden there was a rhythm. And there was something that happened I'm getting goosebumps. There's something that just happened, and we all kind of fell into a rhythm. And it was just beautiful. We were all together, and there was something more. I can't say what it is, but it was like they were here. Maybe they were here. The acharyas were here, perhaps, but it was just amazing. So I really appreciate when we do the long version of our ancestors as part of our chanting. So.
Well, time for lunch. Tenzo. Tenzo. Lunch.
Roshi.